desktop with the, right.
All right.
Okay.
So why don't we just go around the circle that I see here, and Jake, why don't you kick us off for 5 minutes intro, then Chris, then Rich, and then I'll blab for a little bit. And my guess is once we talk a little bit, plenty of questions and topics will arise. I don't think we're going to be in need of, a list of questions or topics. I think based on what y'all say,
Okay.
it's fine. So
I doubt I can take 5 minutes talking about myself. Actually, I could take an hour, but just to introduce, I am Jake Berry. I'm a poet, a musician, visual artist. In terms of meditation centering prayer, I tried meditation many times, but didn't have any luck with it. Started centering prayer maybe 8 years ago, and then it was off and on for a while. Then we started a regular centering prayer group. Chris started a regular centering prayer group at a Methodist church. And then during the pandemic at Trinity Episcopal in Florence. And since then, it's been centering prayer pretty much every day, twice a day, or one long session, depending on how the day works out. And that has been my practice. How it feeds into my work is it's difficult to say with any kind of precision, other than it seems to have a side effect of giving you a bit of distance from whatever is happening in your life, so that you don't get too entangled in the busyness of the day or of the busyness of the times. And you can always take a step back and see it with some perspective. And that also probably quiets the mind a bit to allow you to listen to those things you need to hear in order to write poetry and things like that. So I don't know if that was 5 minutes. I don't think so.
now, could you say just a little bit of what you do or mean by centering prayer?
But centering, Chris would be a better to explain that than me. But the centering prayer is a form of Christian meditation begun by Father Thomas Keating and others. The way it works is you choose a word that is sacred to you, not something that is so loaded with content that it would be distracting to you. But you choose a word and you close your eyes and focus on that word. And as your mind drifts into thoughts, as it surely will, as you catch yourself drifting into thoughts, you very gently go back to the word. And it's back and forth and back and forth for the entire time that you are meditating, which is usually the amount of time is about 20 minutes twice a day. I wouldn't advise doing it on a full stomach. It's because the way that you know this from the way you breathe, your stomach will get involved and it will distract you. And so, other than that, it's very simple, and there's really no way to screw it up except stopping doing it in the middle of it. And just get up and walk away. Well, that's not a good idea. That's not good for you. And it's probably also advisable at the end of 20 minutes to give yourself 2 or 3 minutes to come back to wherever you've been, and let your mind reacclimate to ordinary day-to-day reality before you jump up. You don't want to just jump up and go, because your bodily functions have slowed down quite a bit, and they need to readjust.
Oh, thank you. Chris.
Yeah. Okay, so I've been doing centering prayer now on a daily basis for 35 years. And prior to that, I did an extremely similar meditation form from India. And I did that for 15 years. So I've been, had a regular practice now for my entire adult life, 50 years or so. And in addition, speaking ecumenically now, I have been a Taoist practitioner as well for the last, depending on how you count, either 32 or 44 years. So I was schooled in a Taoist lineage back in the early 1990s. And I, starting in 1999, I left a rather comfortable job in academia and started teaching Qigong and Tai Chi and Taoist meditation full time. And I've sort of backed off of that since I moved to Alabama and basically moved into retirement. I can't really tell you what meditation does for me because I've been doing it so long. I don't know what it's like not to. So there's no contrast there for me. I will say that probably if I had to summarize the whatever change or transformation it has wrought in me over the years, it would be that there is less and less of a difference between doing formal meditation and just living. My mental state seems to be pretty similar, which can be sort of confusing at first. You can feel as though you've forgotten how to meditate. I would add one thing to what Jake said about centering prayer, which is that you don't need to use a sacred word. Any sacred symbol will do. So the breath can be a symbol that you return to. And the symbol, your breath, a gaze or a glance, just listening to sound, I call it the sacred soundscape. Giving yourself a little Buddha smile, the sacred smile. Any of these can be used as a sort of return device to basically wedge you out of attachment to a thought stream or an experience stream, since we sort of define thought as anything that we experience, sensation, emotion, it's all thought. The use of the sacred symbol, whatever sacred symbol it is basically to allow you to let go of whatever it is you're identified with or caught by, and just let go and consent to the presence and activity of what Christians would call the Holy Spirit and what Buddhists or Taoists might call something else. So that's my 5 minutes, I'm sure.
If I could just pick a couple of little tiny questions along the way. Moved to Alabama from where, Chris? And also, if you could just say a little bit more about the Taoist lineage. I've been reading and teaching Tao Te Ching for many years now, and also read a lot of David Hinton's writing on Taoist philosophy as well. But I'd be just curious for you just fill in just a little more, if you would, please.
Okay. You wanted to hear more about the Taoist thing, and you said something else first.
Yeah,
Where did I move from? I moved
yeah.
from Atlanta,
Oh,
where I've been for about 21 years, and prior to that, North Carolina, and prior to that, New York, and so I've been moving around. The Taoist stuff. As you probably have figured out by now, there are probably as many different kinds of Taoists as there are different kinds of Christians or different kinds of Buddhists. I was schooled initially in a Taoist lineage that was it was Neo-Taoist, probably Chan influenced. So no visualizations, very apophatic in terms of the meditation. Meditation was very similar to centering prayer, except the Taoists, like Zen Buddhists, place a whole lot more emphasis on the posture of the body and how the body is held in meditation posture and breathing and so on and so forth. but the let go-ness of the technique is shared by the Taoist school that I was schooled in. The Taoists also consider various movements or standing meditations to be meditation as well. But in this particular lineage, whatever you were practicing, whether it was some martial arts set or Qigong, it would end up with a period of meditation, basically to ground and integrate whatever energy or expression of energy you've been playing with. I also spent 5 years in private tutelage with a Chan master, a Chinese Shaolin Chan master, and studied some Northern Shaolin and a bunch of other stuff. And I've been doing Tai Chi Chuan now for about 44 years. Bagua Zhang, which is another internal martial art, Chinese martial art, for about 30 years. So I spent a lot of time doing these things, and that helps actually to externalize into your body and into your life the sort of the seeds planted by meditation in your mind, is how I would express it, metaphorically, of course.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's interesting to hear Jake and Chris. I don't know that I've met you, Chris, in person before, but it's great to meet you on screen. And gosh, I've realized I'm the relative newcomer in this foursome, but that's it's been interesting because in part of the formation of my practice, and I guess I should say I'm principally a visual artist, from drawing and painting to performance art and sound poetry and other forms. But right now, I guess most concentrating on drawing and painting as my mode of expression. And my practice, I would say my daily formal practice started about 8 years ago. It started as just a basic, secular mindfulness practice, sort of coming out of a time in my life where I just needed. It was a sort of a crisis point, and I needed a shift. And along with a lot of other things, I started meditating and with apps and whatever I could find, and I was kind of gobbling up anything I could find. And then finally, it was actually a chance one day, sit with the Everyday Zen, that and I talked with Kathy Fisher, who was doing some practice discussion, and she said, I know you're in Georgia and you probably have no idea, and this sounds really weird, but there's a guy in Alabama that has been doing he's a poet, Hank Lazer. And I said, well, of course. And so I just sort of laughed because now sort of going back to my undergrad years, I've known Hank and Jake both about 25 years. And speaking about the Dao De Jing, Jake actually gave me the first little copy of the Dao De Jing back about that time when we first met. And I read the first statement or gata of, the true Tao is not the one that is spoken or written. So I said, oh, well, obviously, and I just put it away. That was as far as I got. But I have since, of course, picked it back up. But so that, and then also I had a girlfriend who was interested in meditation. And so we went to some Buddhist form of center in Huntsville that was around in 5 Points at the time. And we got a sort of a crash course in how to meditate. and neither of us really did anything with that. We went the one time, and I thought it was interesting, um, and but it sort of fell by the wayside as well um, until again about 8 years ago. But it as I moved from the sort of mindfulness stuff, and reconnecting with Hank, I really just embraced the Soto Zen lineage at that point. So about 4 years ago, and um, I've it it helped, I think, for me to find that one tradition to really focus in on, and kind of have a barometer for kind of understanding everything else, and you know, um, and learning a little bit of Tai Chi along the way as well. It has been nice to just kind of center my body, and it's a more of a performative kind of thing. So it did kind of resonate with me in that way. But so really a daily sitting practice, and how it has helped or influenced my artwork, I guess. Really, we were just talking off camera about before we started recording, about taking the precepts in the Zen tradition, and um, I think that really embracing the Bodhisattva precepts has been a lens through which I'm looking at my art, and uh, my creative practice, as well as my volunteering and other things that I do outside of teaching art, that I'm just sort of again finding that way of making my practice and a complete so there's no separation. It's a way of life, rather than, see, here I'm on the cushion, and 5 minutes from now I won't be. And so that's been my experience so far.
Oh, wow. How lovely to hear each of you. Very, very inspiring. And Chris makes me very eager to head up to Florence one of these times and spend a little bit of time up there, and sit together and move together. I'd really like to learn more from you in that regard. So thank you. It's great to meet you. And Jake and Rich I've known for a while now, partly through Wayne Sides.
Yep.
And art activities up in Florence. So my own practice really came about from a couple of different angles. So I grew up in California, in Northern California, and went to Stanford as an undergrad. And so in the late 60s, when I was allegedly growing up, a lot of things were in the air, including various forms of mystical experience and turning to other forms of religious and spiritual experience. And so it was, just as drugs and rock and roll and alternative living arrangements and radical politics were requirements, so was learning something about other spiritual traditions. And so I'm born and raised and still am Jewish, and spend some time involved more in Jewish textuality and thinking than study institutional affiliation. And so I did start some sitting in the late 60s, and then took about 25 years off. And as a poet, a poet that I came in contact with is Norman Fisher, who is the abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center and heads up the Everyday Zen Foundation. And Norman and I read together as part of an anthology reading in San Francisco, and I stayed at his house, and I thought, well, maybe he can remind me about how to sit. And so he has a little Zendo on property there in Muir Beach. And we sat for 45 minutes. And I thought, okay, I guess I can do this. And so after that time, I started sitting again, a little bit sporadically, and had Norman visit University of Alabama, where I was teaching and then doing administrative work. Had him visit on 3 or 4 different occasions, and we would do sort of short retreats, sittings, and that's part of how I developed, also convened this Quiet Tide Sangha, where we meet every Thursday via Zoom now. So I've been doing, and my meditation practice comes out of the Soto lineage, Shenryu Suzuki's Northern California lineage. And Norman has been a mixture of all things: friend, colleague, poet, comrade, and definitely my Zen teacher. And some affiliations with the Houston Zen Center. Another dear friend that Rich knows as well, Lynn Snow, who's a psychologist, gerontological psychologist, leads a Sunday meditation group. It's affiliated with the Unitarian Church. And well, this has been happening for several years. This whole domain of the spiritual is a vague and beautiful thing with many different facets to it and all. That was, I was asking Norman at one point, so what do you call this this spiritual thing that we're trying to talk about? He said, he calls it the vague, because again, it's just, there's so many dimensions and so hard to, of course, why would we want to pin it down? So it's back to the way called way is not the way. And we're just, I get poem 1 of the Tao Te Ching, but I really increasingly value sort of, I don't know, cross-spiritual conversations. Mark Burnett, who I guess was affiliated with the Florence Episcopal Church and then Birmingham. Is that right?
Yeah, he was I think curate for a little while at Trinity in Florence. Yeah.
Well, and Mark is the real deal in that. What I mean by that is a person involved in a spiritual journey that involves doubt, questioning, and exploration in many different directions. And so I actually ended up, after a long discussion with him, I instead of saying took communion, I'd say accepted communion and participated in that experience, which I found very quite wonderful. So my wife and I inherited a farm about 10 years ago, and the only little neighbor that we have who looks out for the property some is Pentecostal. And Jerry and I have fairly interesting open conversations, and he didn't get out a gun when I told him I was a Jewish Buddhist. So it was all okay. And again, it's just those very fruitful, open conversations. Another group that we're in touch with is Alabama Meditation Network, developing out of Birmingham now, that a Zen priest came to develop, and he unfortunately developed a cancer and passed away within the year of helping to develop that network. But it's also really thriving. So I think I took the precepts about 5 years ago. There's a sesshin, Rohatsu sesshin, that takes place on a yearly basis in a little fishing village in Mexico that Norman and Kathy have been leading for 25 years or so now, and bilingual. And it's just a beautiful experience. A lot of Mexican folks taking part as well. So I've been pretty steadily doing meditation for 25 years and poetry for 50 years. And increasingly, as y'all are talking about on the cushion and off the cushion and how that life blends together, yes, and the same is true with the poetry practice as well, which increasingly I think of as a wisdom path, not so much a craft path where you learn something about, a line break or eliminating adjectives or something like that. It's more deeply rooted in a life path. And I think I've learned and seen that in Jake's work and in Rich's work as a visual artist. So that's enough.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I think we should just open it up to questions, thoughts, any follow-ups that people have. Got a little over 30 minutes of time to spend time together.
Or we could just sit for 30 minutes.
Maybe better than what we'll say, but still probably talk.
Yeah. Well, I remember, Hank, when you and I first met, uh, 40 years ago, 35 years ago, however long ago it was, we were a little bit odd together because we were both practicing what was then called experimental poetry, uh, and we were spiritually inclined, which put us and made us kind of unpopular for a little while.
Doubly damned, doubly damned.
Yeah, yeah, it's like we couldn't win for losing there, because if you were experimental, you couldn't possibly be spiritual. But we insisted on doing both, and I agree with you about the craft part of it. That is less and less appealing as an idea. It grows organically out of your life. That you the line breaks and things like that take care of themselves. And I see that in your work in particular. It is such, it almost puts you in a meditative state to read it. So it's obviously coming from that place.
I hope.
And
I hope so.
I think it is.
Let me ask something else related to centering prayer. So it seems like a cousin experience or activity. Any of y'all do gratitude practices of different forms? I know Norman at one point had suggested, well, at the end of the day, before you go to sleep, have in mind something that you're grateful for during that day. And I find with the different Christian groups that I am in conversation with, that some forms of gratitude practice seem to be quite central. Also, I seem to have a lot of friends who are involved in AA and substance abuse recovery, and gratitude practice figures in there as well. I'm just curious what y'all might have to say about the dimension of gratitude as part of your experience.
Jake.
No, it's going to have to be one of you two. Hank and I have already said, I've already talked enough, so you guys have to talk.
Oh, okay. Well, I pray oftentimes a little prayer. Oh, you who are the sustainer of our bodies, minds, hearts, and souls, bless all that we receive with thankfulness, and bless me with the thankfulness to receive your all in all. So gratitude, I think, is an attitude that figures prominently in really all spiritual paths. It basically opens up the heart, the soul, the mind to reality. We don't, and within the centering prayer compartment, we don't specifically teach a gratitude practice, but we do teach a sort of variation on the theme of centering prayer called the welcoming prayer, which is used basically to deal with negative sensations or emotions or things perceived as negative. And basically putting oneself in the attitude to accept them, to allow them to be and be grateful for them. And this is actually, many people find it. There are actually even welcoming prayer groups in North Alabama that just practice that exclusively. We haven't made it too much of a feature of our group. People are still just focused on kind of the main menu, and we haven't gotten off into too many side tracks or side diversions yet.
Yeah, I don't have a formal gratitude practice other than, well, I keep from time to time a sort of gratitude journal, uh, affirmations, gratitude, and sort of simple pleasures or something like that throughout the day, and uh, they sort of engender gratitude, but I wouldn't say I sit and do a formal, like a metta practice or something like that in that form, but that's interesting to think about.
So, and you were talking to Mark Burnett about, and that's where you got this idea, Hank?
Yeah, Norman Fisher talked to me a little bit about that at one point, and friend who's been sober for about 30 years. That's a daily part of his practice is each day, and within his family as well, is he, his wife, and his daughter. Also, each day will write down something that they're grateful for. It's a sort of consciousness of gratitude. I think for me, a core experience of gratitude, which often occurs in meditation, is gratitude for being incarnate for this strange, miraculous body, breath, mind, soul that we participate in, a beautiful mystery that it takes some activity to awaken us to it. I think of it, I just did a little talk in a class, and concept that I always resort to is the notion of defamiliarization. So I'll always ask the class, how many of you in here are breathing? And basically, then it takes them a second, but they realize they all are, but it's not something we notice or are grateful for until you do something like meditation that pauses our non-mindfulness to realize, oh wow, this is really something. What a gift! What a special kind of thing. And I think that's also with some elements of visual art, poetry, experimental poetry, especially art forms that are in some ways radically different. They kind of stop us in our tracks enough that we just don't speed read through it the way we might a quick newspaper article or something like that. Right. So maybe that pause or step back is a crucial part of practice.
Yeah, definitely poetry will do that to you, I think. I've been writing poetry since it was 14, or trying. And the way poetry occurs is that it comes to you without, you have to kind of, we were talking about this in Centering Prayer, you have to be accident prone to meditation, make you more accident prone to enlightenment. And so it works that way with poetry too. And poetry is one of those accidents that happens to you, and you can't just sit down and write a poem. I mean, you can, but it probably won't be very good. Or very interesting, but it's something that just happens to you. And that to me always opened my mind to other points of view, other perspectives, rather than just ordinary reality, the way we were handed it and taught to believe in it, which is just grow up, go to school, get a job, have a family, and don't think too much, because that's going to get in the way. And sure enough, it does get in the way, but in a whole different way than you expected when you stop and just breathe. And when you do just stop and breathe, you realize how miraculous that is.
So Rich and I in the Thursday group, we've been embarking through Joan Sutherland's book, "The Forests of Many Colors," about koan practice. We've embarked on koan practice, which bears some similarity to what you're talking about in terms of centering prayer and focusing on a word or a few words. And what you're saying, Jake, one that we've considered through Joan Sutherland, and we've mainly taken on what I think of as vernacular koans, brief statements, not so much extended classic stories from Luke Cliff Record or Book of Serenity, but one that she presented to us is practice is what makes us more fetchable. Practice is what makes us more fetchable. And you're talking about poetry and accidents. I'm a golfer, and Ben Hogan was fond of saying, finds that the more he practices, the luckier he gets. So it's the paradox of these crafts is seems to me is both. You know, I think of Coltrane practicing scales between sets and then just doing mind-blowing improvisatory far out work, but it's both the practice. I guess that's why we call it practice, and that word resonates through so many things that we do. But I love that remark of Joan Sutherland's that practice is what makes us more fetchable.
I agree.
There's a guy was saying, practice doesn't make perfect, practice is perfect.
Very Dogen remark as well.
Mm.
Shunryu Suzuki said one of those remarks is, you're already perfect exactly as you are, and you could use a little improvement.
Mhm.
Shifting gears, I did want to mention, I guess, beyond my art practice or the creative practice, which I think is it seems to link all four of us. My interest has been in doing been doing a lot of volunteering, particularly with hospice, and that has really been influencing and being influenced by my practice, especially in reference to the precepts, and then trying to integrate some of my creative practice into my work with the patients and that sort of thing. And so it's been a nice bridge, I think, to kind of hold, I guess, a container to kind of hold both of those impulses, to the sort of creative and the spiritual impulse, to have both of those at the same time. It was interesting. I was talking yesterday at the unit to a woman who just turned 100, and we were just and she's just sharp as a tack, and just, she only has some minor sort of ailments that kind of make her uh, physically frail, but she just sits there and just anyway, she told me a lot about her life, but she was saying that just remembering that you are exactly where you're supposed to be at this moment, and it sounded remarkably similar to every other teaching in this this and other spiritual traditions. And so it was really nice to be reminded of that in a way from a person who obviously has lived that. And so that's nice, to have those moments and interactions. And she was also talking about linkages, like finding those moments of socialization and community that are so important to longevity. So anyway, that was a couple of lessons that I had in the couple of hours that I was sitting with her. Um, and part of that time I was drawing her hands, and then the rest of the time she was just telling me about her life. So it was great.
Oh, beautiful.
Do you find that meditation helps you to be a better listener?
Absolutely. Just training yourself to be just present with the other person, and okay with that silence between you, and not have to fill the space with a bunch of words, or which I still fight with. I keep feeling like I need to ask them a question or something, but if they are alert and willing to talk. But it's sometimes it's just nice to walk in the room and sit and be with the person without any expectation. It's just been, I don't think that I could have even conceived of doing that without my meditation practice.
Hmm.
Or it would have taken a lot of training in some other respect to get there. So
it teaches you to sit still and be quiet.
yeah.
I so admire that, what you're
Yeah.
doing, Rich, and that it
too.
speaks to issues that we face in different ways that we've alluded to, is the integration of our experience once we're off the cushion, and then especially if one's sincere and dedicated to a particular art practice, it's not always easy to bring that into a social or useful, immediately useful dimension. And
Right.
I just admire the way you've done that with just such absolute integrity. And obviously, you experience great learning from doing it as well. It's a really beautiful thing to discover and find.
Yeah. And you draw hands very well, which is something that even great artists have trouble. And Michelangelo had trouble with hands. But so you picked one of the hardest things you can possibly do in terms of visual arts and focused on that.
Well, for me,
that
drawing
takes-
hands is much easier than trying to draw their face, because I
Oh, really? That's beautiful work. I mean, what
Thank
I've
you.
seen of it, yeah.
Let me ask a horribly simple question, especially to Jake and Chris more so. Who or what do you pray to? And if it's an offensive question, just say next or something like this. I don't mean it. So, I'm just genuinely, I'm curious.
Well, I suppose I would say that we pray to the great mystery. And I think that centering prayer practice is basically it's an apophatic practice. It's a practice that where you dispense with your images or concepts. So we're not visualizing Jesus or Mother Mary or anything like that when we're doing it. And in fact, if you did have a vision of Jesus or Mother Mary, the instruction would simply be to return to your sacred word as soon as you were aware that you were off it. So in centering prayer, we're basically just consenting to the presence of the great mystery within, and because it does seem to have therapeutic effects, and we just sort of allow it to have its way with us. As far as the rest of the day or night goes, I think we just relate to what we call the presence. The presence of the holy, the divine, the mystery, the felt presence. And as time goes on in practice, with practice, one becomes more attuned, I suppose, to that presence, so that one feels it as a more tangible experience over time. But it's not like the whole practice is about releasing control. It's not about using prayer to get what you want or to somehow change your environment or change yourself in a way that yourself feels is a good idea. I pray in words. Often I recite prayers because often recitation of a prayer like the Our Father or the Hail Mary or whatever has a mantric quality to it that brings me in alignment or in attunement with that sense of presence. But I'm not too concerned about who God is. I think that there's a famous saying, an anecdote recounted by William Johnston, who was a Jesuit who was a missionary in Japan after World War II and became an avid Zen practitioner. and in fact was a mentor of Shinzen Young when he was a young man over in Japan. And Father William Johnston would go and meditate with his Zen master and go to sesshin and stuff. And I think the Zen master would say, one day, you know, all of this will fall away and you will just be experiencing your true self. And Father Johnston said, no, it'll all fall away and I'll be experiencing God. And the master thought for a while and he said, same thing. So, yeah, a 9th century Sufi, Bayezid Bastami, said, I searched for God and all I found was myself. I searched for myself and all I found was God. So I don't know, Jake, do you have anything more you'd like to say about Christian
That's
prayer?
pretty darn good. We all fall into the trap of concepts of God, and you have a discovery during your life, something event happens to you, or maybe even during prayer, and it gives you something that changes your life, and that's great for a little while, and then that becomes a concept, and then that concept becomes hardened, and then you realize it's blocking you from actually having any kind of experience of any spiritual presence at all. So the thing that was the source of light is now an idol. So you have to break through that block, and or just basically let it go. And once you let it go, all is well again. You're back on the road. So and this happens over and over again. As soon as you have a concept, you're in trouble. So the best thing to do is to avoid those things. So when you say God, that's an English word derived from a German word. It has 3 letters, begins with G and ends with D, and that doesn't tell you a thing about what we're talking about. It's a question. Yeah. It's the great question that we're always looking for a better question.
I think it's often the case that when people go through a phase in their life that you may say is more intensely transformative, like a conversion experience or an enlightenment experience, a breakthrough experience of whatever kind, they're in a liminal space, and as social beings, we tend to look to others for clues on how to conceptualize what it is that we're experiencing. So people typically get socially imprinted on spiritual or religious concepts or symbols, and unfortunately they make the potential cognitive error of assuming that there is a one-to-one relationship between the concept and the experience, and that no other concepts or experiences would fit into the equation. So like Jake said, it's a form of delusional idolatry. But, you know, the thing is that our concepts, however flawed or relative, tend to be sort of, they're like snowshoes that allow us to walk across difficult and difficult to manage territory sometimes. And for a lot of people, they're the only shoes they have. So I don't think we need to sort of negate them or look down on them. But it just at a certain point of maturity, you let them go.
Yeah, I would concur with so much of that. And I certainly know people involved in typically more institutional or church-centered spiritual life, where they have very specific, concrete, conceptual senses of the divine, of Jesus, of the Holy Spirit. And I don't derogate it, it's taken me a long time to realize, just listen to that listen to what that experience is for that person. that's all I can do. What you described earlier, Chris, is that some felt presence of the mystery. Boy, that's what I've certainly staked my poetry on, is an engagement with that elusive felt presence, which I also identify with this flickering, changing experience of consciousness that we have. And as a Jew and then a Buddhist, I'm so schooled in a non-representational experience of the divine. Even as a Reformed Jew, it was, to have a pronounceable name for God, you were already in big trouble at that point, because you'd created an idol because you could say this word, and so all these, every word you encounter, you have some pronunciation that has nothing to do with the Hebrew letters that you're looking at. And that was so deeply ingrained in me, and qualities of skepticism. And I was horrible. I was so bad at religious school. They put me in the basement to get me away from other people. But what I can remember in a 10th grade class, in our confirmation class, the rabbi being asked, "Do Jews believe in an afterlife?" And he immediately starts, well, so-and-so says this, and on the other hand, so-and-so says this. And so this other person says that, what do you think? And so inculcated in that, and that's part of why Zen practice became so congenial for me, is that it doesn't begin with a consideration of God and the nature of God. It begins with suffering in this life here, and goes from there. And remember the story of just the first World Congress of Religions held in the latter part of the 19th century began with, before the meeting could begin, what do we do with the Buddhists? So what do you mean, what do we do with the Buddhists? Well, all the rest of us here in this discussion have a belief in God. They don't even consider that. Can they be part of this conversation? The answer is yeah, it's okay. So it's that's part of why I asked that question. And there's just so much variety, so many different versions of snowshoes and no snowshoes take place over time. Of course, we don't get that much snow in Alabama, so it's not so much of an issue.
Well, recently we've had our problems with snow.
Pretty good dose, yeah.
Mm.
Some snowshoes would have been handy.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago.
Funny thing, a word that's been mentioned just once or twice has been therapeutic value. And I just, of course, assume that meditation has a therapeutic value, but my psychologist friend periodically will present research to me pointing out the therapeutic value of it. And I think, well, duh, did you think it would be really harmful and all that? The book I'm reading now, a lot of psychological research has gone away from sort of cognitive research to studying emotional intelligence, or the nature of emotional experience. So the book I'm reading is Awe by a Berkeley psychologist, Dr. Keltner. And fascinating. And of course, what you find out is daily experiences of awe, often in a natural setting, it's therapeutic in the sense of it's anti-inflammatory, for example. Meditation and nature immersion, which Japanese do these outings, produce increased T cells and combat development of cancers. So it's interesting, the scientific research, or John Kabat-Zinn and the entire use of meditation and mindfulness for relation to PTSD. I didn't expect it to be otherwise, but it's really kind of fascinating to see the specificity of neurological research right now, and in the use of psychedelics and healing properties there as well. I read up about it. I'm not surprised that these things are beneficial.
I think that it's great that there is research that is now promoting the value or therapeutic value of meditation. There's also research that shows that it's not all a sunny day at the lake. And whereas the great mystery can be awesome, it can also be, for certain people at certain times, awful. And people on, extended retreats, go on a Vipassana retreat where they're sitting on a cushion for 16 hours a day. They can, and deconstructing their experience, they can basically come apart. So, I remember being on a retreat in the around 1980, 81. And it was supposed to be 2 weeks long. And this other guy was there, and he was all smiles on day 1 and day 2. Day 3, he shaved off his mustache. And by day 4, he'd forgotten his name. And they took him out in a straitjacket. His wife came to get him. Things like that happen due to meditation. And I think that we always have to be careful when we promote it, that it's just not all peaches and cream. And people have to recognize that in the process of unveiling their deeper selves, or the mysteries of the mystery, that they can encounter things that may be difficult to integrate at times. And it's not all a Bliss Bunny's vacation. Enough of my rant.
No, hence the need for teachers and friends.
Yes, absolutely.
For sharing it. Well, I see
It's like any other medicine as well. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we've got just another minute or two of our allocated hour. I just want to say thank you, Jake, for convening us. I'm really inspired by and grateful for the conversation. And maybe via email we can think of what next.
Right. Good idea. Let's keep this going in some form.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great meeting you people.
Very good. And again,
Me too, Chris.
It's not that far from Tuscaloosa to Florence. So I look forward to an opportunity to.
Yeah, come up and do a reading, and we will sit together.
That would be great to combine it all. And
Oh yeah.
Rich, I look forward to.
Let me know and I'll be up there.
Yes, all 4 of us. That'd be great.
Yeah, we can all do that. Thank you. And then Jake, I'll be in touch. The recording, it'll be on my computer, and then we'll figure out what the hell to do with it.
Okay, we can put it on YouTube, and anybody that wants to endure it can.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks to each of you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Let's see. So here we go.